And welcome back to our series working through the books on the shelves behind me, as we explore their methodology, not simply their content. As we move into thinkers that are very much contemporaneous with even these videos, like that means the writers were alive in my own lifetime even, instead of multiple generations before, we start hitting a space that I find incredibly fun to read, but also becomes probably the most misunderstood, or at least the ones that are most commonly screwed up. And Zizek is not at all alone in this or really unique, but given his relative fame, I think it's safe to say he's one of the more continually misread thinkers in terms of, sheer volume. I've even found myself making the joke sometimes that Zizek misreads Zizek, given that really his thing is a weird mixture of Lacan and Hegel, two of the most notoriously complicated thinkers. You really can't be surprised at that. And given I always recommend people find their way into Lacan through Zizek's writings on him, I thought it important to bring in the book I usually recommend is Everything You Wanted to Know About Lacan But Were Afraid to Ask Hitchcock. It's a series of essays going through the works of Hitchcock, an undisputed master of the art of film, using those to get at Lacanian concepts. But there's kind of a big snag. It's where everyone seems to go wrong, about Zizek especially, and also about his other Hitchcock analyses. They think he's interpreting films. It's like he's a film studies professor pointing out symbols. The birds represent maternal anxiety, or the spiral staircase symbolizes psychological vertigo. This basically misses the entire point of what's happening when Zizek's doing his thing. See, Zizek isn't reading Hitchcock. He's using Hitchcock to perform a demonstration of how cultural objects operate as philosophical machinery. Let me be really clear on this, because you're going to miss this point if you don't pay attention and I fail this, and if so, you miss everything. Zizek's method does not discover meanings in films. It produces new objects through acts of analysis. If you don't understand the distinction, you are probably still trapped in that sort of high school English teacher model of interpretation, where poems have a hidden meaning waiting to be uncovered like a literary Easter egg hunt. God, the YouTube videos. The actual method, the thing Zizek is doing that matters to us here, involves a couple interconnected operations that sort of work together to transform both the films and our understanding of how culture functions. And no, it's not metaphorical. These are literal. The films become different through this process. Recognizing this is essential to understanding what theoretical work actually does. When Zizek says Hitchcock's camera movements operate through the same logic as unconscious processes, he is not being metaphorical. He's not saying the camera is like the unconscious or represents psychological states. He is saying the technical apparatus of cinema is literally operating through the exact same structural mechanisms that organize unconscious life. Let's take one of the ones he uses, the famous vertigo shot, that amazing dolly zoom that makes the stairwell stretch and compress simultaneously. Every film school graduate will tell you this represents Scotty's vertigo, his psychological disorientation. It's a really difficult hill to get over. And if you're doing real criticism and analysis, this hurts. And I get it. It took me time to get over this hill myself. Structural homology, though, it's not a metaphor. Metaphor is a lazy man's work. This is like that. It's some bullshit that's blah. It's not even interesting, really. It's something that can be co-opted by people that compare things that are not different, but different. Imagine a knockoff Jean Baudrillard saying, "America, it is like a rusted, rotting tire belt on the side of a highway." But you are the one that actually has to do the work to make that metaphor happen, you know. It's not anything. It's just lazy. Structural homology, which is the brunt of I think, good analysis. It's less about the content and more about the logic of process, the structural logic of things. Think of a sine wave. It has a function. This function doesn't change if I'm talking about ocean tides or the music I make with my Eurorack setup. We're not talking about resemblance. We aren't talking about symbolic reference. We're talking about homological structure. Get it? So the shot doesn't represent vertigo or whatever. It produces the structural experience of the impossible object of desire through cinematic technique. The camera movement creates a spatial impossibility, moving forward yet pulling back, approaching yet receding. This is exactly, not metaphorically, not symbolically, it is structurally exactly how the object petit a functions in Lacanian theory. The object of desire that you just can never reach because approaching it changes its coordinates. The stairwell doesn't symbolize unconscious structures. It performs them. The viewer's visual system literally cannot reconcile contradictory spatial information. Your perception of all this breaks down in exactly the same way the subject breaks down when confronting the real. The technique doesn't show you what vertigo feels like. It produces the structural conditions of subjective dissolution. It produces it with you. There's another one everyone really misses. I love it. A point of view shot in Rear Window. Film critics always babble about how this implicates the viewer in voyeurism, makes us complicit in Jeff's surreptitious watching. I know a few YouTube channels that would love to have this complex analysis elevate there. The point of view shot in this doesn't make you complicit to voyeurism. It produces the structural position of the subject under the gaze of the other. When you are the one looking through Jeff's camera, you're not just watching. You are being positioned as a subject who can never see themselves seeing. The shot creates that fundamental gap between the eye and the gaze that Lacan identifies as the constitutive thing of subjectivity itself. I mean, think about it. In a point of view shot, you see what the character sees, but you don't see yourself seeing it. You're absent from this field of vision. You're not even seeing Jeff see it. So who the fuck is seeing it? Right? This isn't a limitation of film technique. This is a reproduction of how subjectivity actually functions. The subject is always missing from its own picture. The point of view shot doesn't represent this psychological truth. It produces it at a technical level. So yes, read this book I'm recommending to understand Lacan, but there's something far more radical happening within Zizek's takes on film here. He's talking about certain operations that exist independently of specific manifestations. The structure precedes and even exceeds any instance of film. By looking for this instead of symbolic meaning, you're no longer looking for what things mean, and you start recognizing how things operate. Cultural objects work like this all the time, and when you stop looking at representational elements, you can see what people are doing, and that's one of the best things about how Zizek takes us through this and how Lacan and those that came after him did philosophy. Lacan's reading of the Purloined Letter is not a symbolic retelling. It is structurally homologous. So, let's say you're following me a little bit. You're able to start getting deeper into how Zizek is revealing the way these various elements of the Lacanian unconscious work. Again, not as metaphors, but as the thing. So let's do an example. For Lacan, really tough one. Symptom. Symptom is we'll just say a nuanced thing. I used to say and make the mistake said in many that if you sneeze, well, a sneeze is a symptom of a hidden illness. That's an example of a symptom. It's a metaphor. I've done this. It's stupid. Symptom is not a hidden meaning. It's not an unconscious intent. It's the point where cultural objects contradict their own structural logic. It reveals something it can't acknowledge about itself. A surface reading of Rear Window would say, it's a thriller about a photographer who discovers a murder. That's life on easy mode. Fuck that. Better talk about the functionality of how the gaze operates, how the panopticon from Foucault works. Does being watched change things for people? Again, not as metaphor, but as functional logic. Now watch it with this angle, and it makes you sort of able to see the symptom when it shows up. Here's my attempt. Now, do not blame Zizek for this. If this is stupid, it's me. So in Rear Window, Jeff spends this whole film looking for evidence of this murder, right? He's watching everything. He sees all, and with seemingly perfect info, he's putting pieces together along with us. The plot, supposedly about solving this crime, but the film doesn't really invest any energy in the solution, and neither does Jeff. The murderer basically confesses the moment he's confronted. The revelation is perfunctory. It's incidental. Instead, the film obsessively focuses on the maintenance of the watching apparatus itself. There's a weird reality here I think we can see in the surveillance state as well. Most people are pretty aware. The government is basically recording and controlling all data, knowing everything about us. Nobody really gives a shit. We go about our daily lives just like the people in Rear Window. But the hyper-paranoiac state of, I don't know, my lifetime, but the last decade, has gotten so bad. It's almost comical how much everyone is a threat against everything all the time. Again, not a metaphor. We can see how this comes to function like this in the apparatus itself. The apparatus of the terror of losing the apparatus. Every threat in the film, right? What is the threat threatening? It's threatening Jeff's ability to keep watching. Lisa climbing into the apartment doesn't advance the murder plot. It threatens the watching setup. The anxiety we feel isn't about failing to solve a murder. It's about whether Jeff might not be able to keep being a voyeur. The killer approaching Jeff's window doesn't reveal new information about the crime that we didn't know. It endangers the system at work. The film doesn't care about solving the murder. Jeff cares about it, but not really as the thing itself. Everything really cares about preserving the conditions for voyeuristic enjoyment. The murder plot is the pretext for establishing and maintaining a watching machine. Now, no, this is not Hitchcock's conscious intention. We're way beyond death of the author here. It's like what the formal sort of structure of the film reveals. Despite itself, it can't help but show us this. Symptom. Rear Window was made in 1954, the same year television ownership in America passed 50%. The film's obsession with watching through a window screen, multiple channels of visual entertainment, the anxiety of maintenance of the viewing apparatus. The film unconsciously performs the very voyeuristic structure television basically made universal then. So yeah, it's incredible to see these ideas through films that you should have seen more than a few times. More incredible is that you kind of learn, actually, you've never really seen any of these films at all. Let me explain. When Zizek reads Hitchcock through Lacan, he's not explaining what Hitchcock's films meant, right? He's creating new objects. But these objects, ideas, these machines, they didn't exist before his intervention. The films are literally different post-analysis. This isn't some Petersonian postmodernist all interpretation is valid bullshit. No, it's about understanding how meaning operates temporally. The past doesn't really have fixed meanings waiting to be discovered. The past is constantly being reconstituted through the present, through interventions in the present. Years ago, I was introduced to an amazing TV show called The Wire. I mentioned to a coworker that I had started the first episode, and they said they were jealous of me because I get to watch it for the first time. You know what that means, that feeling. You know that's true, and it's true for me, for sure. Vertigo before Zizek was just a psychological thriller about a man obsessed with this dead woman mom, right? Vertigo after Zizek? I guess it's a structural diagram of fantasy's temporal logic, demonstrating how the object of desire ultimately is constituted through its own impossibility. This last time, at least. It genuinely made me realize what Lacan was talking about because of this. These aren't two interpretations of the same film. They're two films. Zizek's intervention has retroactively transformed what Vertigo is for me. And once you've encountered his reading or a reading, you can't watch the same film that existed before. The spiral staircase now performs philosophical operations. The color green now functions as a marker of the real's intrusion. Judy's transformation into Madeline now demonstrates the violent process of symbolic inscription. Electrons didn't start behaving differently after quantum theory, right? But quantum theory revealed capacities that were there, but we couldn't recognize. Rain wasn't some other thing before we understood evaporation and condensation and climate. Hitchcock's films always had these capacities, but they needed Zizek's framework to activate them. This is why people who say Hitchcock wasn't Lacanian, which I've seen videos on, miss the fucking point. Of course, he wasn't consciously applying Lacanian theory. Who gives a shit anyway? His films are performing philosophical operations that Lacanian theory can recognize and activate. His films and their workings reveal the workings and logic of a ton of things. And beyond that structural homology, Zizek is also retroactively building new films entirely. The retroactive dimension means every reading creates new possibilities for what cultural objects might become now. When Zizek reads The Birds through the lens of a maternal superego, great reading, he's not discovering what the film meant in 1963. He's creating a new cultural object that can perform theoretical work in the present. The important point: analysis doesn't discover pre-existing meanings. It produces new capacities in cultural objects. The film becomes capable of doing things it could not do before. It can now function as a philosophical machine, a theoretical apparatus, a tool for thought. The reason people consistently misread Zizek's method connects to deeper, Zizek would say, ideological structures about how we think meaning works. We're trained from elementary school to believe that cultural objects contain meanings, that interpretation somehow discovers. Poem has a meaning, a film has a theme, the novel has symbols. This is
The name of this trash can is ideology.
This ideology of interpretation serves specific functions. It naturalizes meaning. If meanings are in texts waiting to be discovered, then meaning is natural rather than produced. This obscures the productive work of interpretation. It hierarchizes like this readership reality. Because if texts have correct meanings, then some readers, your teachers, shitty YouTubers, assholes on podcasts, they have privileged access to those meanings. It's an interpretive authority that's created. This stabilizes culture. Again, if cultural objects have fixed meanings, then culture is a stable thing rather than something continually transformed through practice. Zizek's method threatens all of this. If interpretation produces rather than discovers meaning, then the whole edifice of cultural authority effectively collapses. Because anyone can produce new meanings, cultural objects become unstable, constantly open to transformation. Interpretation is creative, not descriptive. This is why academic film theory just ignores Zizek, or at worst, I think, reduces him to this Lacanian film theorist who applies psychoanalysis to cinema. They have to domesticate his method because acknowledging what he's actually doing would reveal their own practice as a mystification. The standard academic reading of Vertigo will catalog its themes: obsession, identity, male desire. Identify the symbols within it. A spiral, the color green, the portrait. And then perhaps maybe apply some overarching theory, the feminist theory, psychoanalytic theory, post-Marxist queer theory. And all of this assumes the film is a stable object with contents to be inventoried, sealed, and commodified. Zizek's reading transforms Vertigo into a machine that produces insights into the structure of fantasy. The film doesn't have a meaning. It performs operations. It doesn't contain symbols. It generates concepts. It doesn't represent psychology. It produces psychological structures. And once you see this difference, you really can't unsee it. Every academic interpretation starts looking like cargo cult criticism, going through the motions of analysis without caring about what's actually on the other side, what it produces. And we live in a time where cultural objects increasingly function as operational devices. They don't really have their own meaning as text. Memes, for example, don't have meanings. They perform operations. Social media posts don't really represent ideas. They produce effects. Political speeches no longer communicate positions. They generate affects. The traditional interpretive framework, looking for what things mean, becomes increasingly useless within this context. What does a TikTok video mean? What does a Trump tweet symbolize? These are the wrong questions. The right ones are, what operations do these objects perform? What capacities do they create within people? What effects do they produce? Zizek's method, developed through reading Lacan, through reading Hitchcock, provides tools for understanding how cultural objects function operationally rather than just semantically. This is crucial for navigating contemporary culture where meaning has become secondary to operation. And that's really the thing I love most about this book and Zizek's method. This is the thing that has carried me back to him over and over, even now. It's this. And goddamn, everyone writes about Zizek's reading, but nobody explains how to do what he actually does. So let me make a terrible attempt. Here is the practical method. Step 1. You ignore the intended meaning. You kind of start by bracketing what cultural objects are supposed to mean. Fuck the authorial intention, historical context, or conventional interpretation. That shit's all distractions. Step 2. Identify formal excess. Look for points where the object's formal structure exceeds its apparent content. Where does it invest unusual energy or unusual amounts of it? Where does technique outstrip a narrative necessity? Step 3. Map structural operations. Ask what philosophical or psychological operations this structure performs, not what it represents, not what it symbolizes, what it does. How does it position people? What processes does it enact within them? Step 4. Connect to theoretical frameworks. Bring theoretical concepts into constellation with the object's operations, not overwhelming it. This is not about explaining what it means at all through these theories, but instead to activate philosophical capacities. The theory does not and will not ever explain the object, or the other way. They will mutually illuminate each other if you do it right. Step 5. Recognize retroactive transformation. You need to be self-aware here. Understand your reading has changed the object, and really you too. It's now capable of different operations. You did not discover anything special in it. You did not discover its meaning. It has produced, and you've produced, new capacities. So let's demonstrate with a fun contemporary example I've kind of used a few times on stream. Let's talk about the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Step 1. We toss out the intended meaning. It's obvious this is intended to be about superhero stories or good versus evil, the eternal struggle, entertainment. Right? There. Out. Step 2. Identify the formal excess. There's a weird thing with these films. There's an obsessive interconnection between them. There's post-credit scenes. There's a requirement to watch everything, even TV shows and side things and web series to understand all of it. There's a infinite deferral of resolution in all of it, even today. Step 3, we map the operations. So the MCU is easy. It performs the structure of capitalist consumption. That's it. It's not a metaphor. Again, literally that. Every film is kind of a partial object that promises completion through consuming the next object, despite the very literal awareness everyone has that at no point is the story actually over. Even the one they're about to see, it can't end. The structure produces desire for totality that can't be achieved because new products are eternally added. And they're presumed. It's a built-in. Step 4, connect to theory. Maybe this could be Lacan's object petit a scaled to franchise level. It could be good. The MCU is a machine for producing and managing desire through partial objects that promise impossible completion. I hope I did it okay. Lacan's tough. And step 5, you have to recognize the transformation. The MCU is no longer entertainment, but actually a really good diagram of how late capitalism structures subjectivity through consumption. There you go. This reading doesn't explain what Marvel movies mean, any of them. It transforms them into a diagnostic instrument for understanding contemporary capital. When you properly apply Zizek's method, what gets produced aren't readings or interpretations, but philosophical instruments. Each analysis creating tools for thinking, and this is the value of it. All the modern philosophy from Mary, not understanding what it means, but gaining equipment for thought. Through reading Lacan, through Hitchcock, via Zizek's method within this book, we get a bunch of machines. There's the gaze machine from Rear Window. It's an instrument for understanding how viewing positions subjects, how the act of looking is always already embedded in power structures, how voyeurism isn't individual but structural. How about the fantasy diagram from Vertigo, a tool for recognizing how desire is organized around impossible objects, how fantasy sustains itself through failure, and how the approach to the object of desire restructures the coordinates of desire itself. Or from Psycho, the symptom detector, a device for identifying points where symbolic order violently asserts itself, where formal excess reveals ideological investment, where technique betrays what narrative cannot acknowledge. North by Northwest, we have the identity machine, an apparatus for understanding how identity is always mistaken identity, how the subject is produced through misrecognition, and how social position precedes individual existence. This is the stuff I love, and this is the shit that academic criticism simply just doesn't get about Zizek. This is not doing film criticism that happens to use philosophy. He's doing philosophy that uses films. Films are laboratories for him. These philosophical concepts become developed, tested, refined. These readings are just experimental reports from philosophical investigations on the fringe. If you've made it this far and you're still asking me, hey Brooks, tell me what Zizek means, you've missed the point. The method doesn't mean anything. It never will. It operates. It transforms cultural objects into philosophical machines. It produces. It does not discover. It creates. It does not interpret. The shift from semantic to operational analysis is essential for understanding contemporary cultural analysis where traditional meaning has collapsed, but operational effects have actually intensified. And we live here. We live in a post-semantic, hyper-operational cultural moment. And Zizek's method provides tools I believe we can use. But of course, it yields the final paradox here. This video itself isn't meant to be interpreted for meaning at all. It's an operational device designed to transform how you approach cultural analysis and philosophy totality. It doesn't explain Zizek's method. Not really. It performs operations that activate new analytic capacities within you if I've done even slightly a decent job. And then you hopefully can use those capacities, because that's the point. The point isn't to understand his method, it's to operate it. The method only exists in operation, not in abstract understanding. But I await comments that say, so Zizek's method means that interpretation is productive rather than descriptive. No, they're still trying to extract meaning. God, the method doesn't mean interpretation is productive. The method produces through operating on cultural objects. I also await comments that say, this explains what Zizek is really doing with Hitchcock. No, I don't. I do not explain anything like that. I am performing operations that activate ways of reading. It transforms here. I transform Zizek's analyses into operational devices for producing further transformations with you. But someone else is going to say, hey, I want to apply this method to a template. This is step 1, step 2, step 3. Fuck. And I debated even putting that part in there, because the method isn't a procedure really to follow. It's a mode of operation that transforms the reader and what's read. You don't apply it, you operate through it. These comments are inevitable because our cognitive habits are just deeply embedded. We are meaning-seeking machines trained by decades of educational structuration. Breaking these habits requires constant vigilance against the tendency to reduce operations to meanings. The only way to understand this method is to use it, not to apply it like a tool external to yourself, but operate through it and with it. Let it transform your capacities. The method doesn't exist as information to be learned, but as operational capacities you must develop. And I guess that's my final point. Zizek always comes back to these same films, obsessively even, these same concepts, these same operations. But it's not because he's repeating himself. A lot of people make that claim, and I'm here to defend him. Every time he does this, every iteration is actually developing operational capacities of these tools further. Every reading of Vertigo doesn't explain Vertigo better. It enhances the machine the film has become. Zizek is continually finding that Zizek can make new things that Zizek can say. So no, don't memorize this video or anything I've said within it. Do not take notes on what it means. Do not even really try to understand it. Operate it. And another thing you can operate, of course, if you can operate a keyboard, you can head over to patreon.com/DGQC if you want to support these videos and others that I'm doing. But if you'd also like to just join us live, we'd always like that. We do readings multiple times a week in the QC, discord.gg/DGQC. And as always, see y'all soon enough.